Today on Global Value Creators, we're thrilled to welcome our friend Henry McGovern, founder of AmRest, the largest restaurant chain in Europe, and now a co-owner of Vapiano. After the Berlin Wall fell, Henry left college to seek opportunities in a changing Europe, moving across the world to Wroclaw, Poland, where he secured the rights for a Pizza Hut in 1993, and 26 years later owned more than 2,300 restaurants. He is considered among the most successful entrepreneurs in the restaurant industry, and we think his story is one of the most remarkable we have discovered. In this in-depth conversation, Henry discusses how he built AmRest, the secrets to his anything is possible culture, and the future of the restaurant industry post-COVID. Thanks so much, Henry, for taking the time. We're really excited to have you. We've been meaning to do this for some time, and I thought considering the COVID crisis and everything else going on, it'd be an particularly interesting time to talk about restaurants. So I was hoping to just kick it off. Maybe we could just start at the beginning. You were born in the States, and maybe you could just take it from there and tell us the story.
Sure, I'll try and summarize 50 years in 5 minutes, but that's not so easy.
10 years per minute, yeah.
Yeah, 10 years per minute. Well, I guess it all started, the fascination with Europe, because my dad, I have 6 brothers and sisters, and in the early 70s, the US was a bit of a mess, and my dad decided, hey, let's take all of these children that we have and take them somewhere where there's not all this chaos. And so he took us to Germany. And my older brothers and sisters went to German schools, and I got to travel around with the family. And so you have these early childhood memories, more stories that come up. So when the Berlin Wall fell, I was just particularly interested to go back. We had some pictures of the whole family in East Berlin in mid 1970s, and I was just a little boy. But so I was curious to see it. So I really came back over to Central Europe out of more of a just interest in seeing what was the most interesting thing in the world that year, which was the fall of the Berlin Wall. And then that sparked an interest to say, hey, this is going to be a pretty major change. Why don't I go and see if there's an opportunity to spend a year or two and just get a life experience and what's the most interesting thing happening in the world. And so I did that. I started a business when I was at Georgetown and had the ability to sell half of that. I put a little bit of change in my pocket, and I said, okay, I can afford a year off.
And that was in real estate, right?
Yeah, that was in real estate. I started a company called Student Housing Association. Now there's quite a bit of businesses in providing off-campus housing, but that was sort of the very beginning of universities were growing their enrollments heavily, but they didn't have the housing stock to be able to serve them. And all the landlords hated students, but they were one of the best paying tenants. So it's funny, you always wonder where life would have taken you. That business was fantastic. And I started it my junior year or into my sophomore year, and immediately had about 105 properties. We were collecting rent semesterly, which I think was the first time anybody had ever done that. So I had amazing cash flow, and who knew? If I had known about business, I would have made, a lot more out of that. But looking back on it, it was really fantastic. And so I bought a couple of buildings. I had the cash flow from those rents, and so I could afford a year off. And I just thought, if I don't do it now, when the hell will I? And so I got on a plane, and then I kept going east a little bit. I got to Berlin, and I said, oh, well, I should go see what Poland, Czech, and Hungary look like. I rented a car. I drove over to the Polish border, and the border controls, they just laughed at me, and they're like, you think you can just drive a German car over into Poland? It doesn't work that way. It'll be stolen in about an hour. So I said, okay, I guess, this isn't Kansas anymore kind of moment. And
this was in the summer, or
this was in,
dropped out? Or?
Yeah, this was right after the Bush election in 92, because I did a little bit of work for that, and then decided I would head over with a good friend of mine, Don Kendall, who was working really a lot on the campaign. So that was November of 92. And then got over, went to Poland, Czech, Hungary, checked those out, thought, wow, this is interesting. I decided I needed to see a bit more of Poland. So after the Christmas holidays, flew back in January, and I drove the entire country of Poland in January. And if you had seen the roads back then, you'd realize what a harrowing tale that is. It was actually interesting. Later on, I set a rule that I wouldn't invest in a country until I drove it. because you really got to understand it, which led to a very bizarre trip 10 years later with my wife and 2 dogs driving a Jeep through Ukraine, also in January. So I didn't learn my lessons about the months, it seems like, but it led me to not investing in the Ukraine, which was a damn good decision.
Absolutely.
So that takes us to the beginning of the company. I bought a building. I got lucky, bought the first privatized building on the main square of Wroclaw, which is a town in the southwest corner of Poland. And when I went to fix it up and rent it, there's lots of different stories. I can tell you a couple of side ones there.
Well,
but
I'd love to hear the phone line story if you don't mind. That's one of my favorites.
Okay, sure. So you got to picture the environment. I show up. I'm 25 years old. I play in this businessman's tennis tournament of Wrocław 2 days after I arrive. Obviously, I have no business, and I'm not sure I'm a business pun, but somehow I play. I make it into the finals, and so I'm meeting all the people of town. And so the story goes, the woman who was translating me, a university student, she said, "Oh, you're interested in real estate? Well, the first auction is on next week if you want to go." So there's some fun stories of trying to figure out, well, how do I register? And I don't have a company yet, et cetera. And so I go into the bank with my Visa card, and I'm taking Visa advances on my card. And $25,000, which was the deposit that was required, equaled 186 million zlotys. It just sounded an astounding figure. So here I am with 186 million zlotys of cash, and I'm just walking out of the bank with it in a bag, and people, think I'm completely mad. I walk over to the mayor's office. I'm like, "Look, I don't have an account yet, but here's 186 million. You can imagine their faces for that one." And so we get registered. We buy the building. That's kind of fun because the wealthiest guy in the city was the only one in the room until I showed up, and then he didn't know what to make of an American with nothing to do but talk about his first experience in Poland, how it was going to go. So he walked out, and I'm the only guy left in the room. And Evan, even I can win an auction where I'm the only guy left in the room. So I do that, and then I, say, "Oh God, now I got to figure out, how do you deal with things here? How do you renovate, set up the company, get all that done, buy the building?" And then I want to build the first Class A office building in the city. So I'm told I have to go meet the president of the phone company to get phone lines. And this is the days where phone and data lines were separate, right? So I put on my coat and tie, I go in, and I'm invited into the president's office. Now you got to go back to good, proper communist times. I mean, it really wasn't communism anymore, but a phone company, a state utility, was still very much that way. 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting in this big room. I'm given a shot of vodka, and I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, okay." I have my shot of vodka at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then I explained to this nice man, "Hey, I've traveled all around Poland. I think Wrocław is really a nice city. I'd like to build the first Class A office building. It's 7 stories high. I need 100 phone lines and 50 data lines." And it's just this horrible, awkward silence. And, so I turned to the translator, being, the dumb American, like, "Look, it was really simple. How did you miss it? Just 7 stories this." And the translator looks back at me and he says, "Henry, I understood. It's just I need you to understand that my family's been waiting 15 years for one phone line." So I go sick ashen, and the president of the phone company looks at me. I mean, he must have thought I was going to throw up on his table, right? I just had the vodka shot. I go all white, heavy. So he looks at me. He says, "I understand. I can give you 4 phone lines and 3 data lines." And I guess I was supposed to be grateful. I don't know. I guess I was, I'm still stunned. It's a 7-story building. I'm not even going to have 1 phone line per floor, right? So I'm just thinking, there goes my first cash. I mean, I might as well go home and pack it up and go back. So anyway, turns out I get back to the office, and we've hired this one woman, Isabella. And she's like, "You did what? You got 7, what? No way. And I said, how much did you have to pay? I didn't pay anything. He gave them to me. No way. So she says, this is unbelievable. So she had a contact at the largest bank in the country, Bank Pekao. And she says, they will take the space immediately if we give them all the data lines. I'm like, what, are you kidding me? So that's what happened. So she calls Bank Pekao. They take 2 floors. They paid me $21 in dollars. Exchange rate back then, was so favorable. So, and then they say, okay, if you need to fix the building, we'll loan you $2 million. So I got my first tenant, $2 million loan to fix the bank because this guy gave me 4 phone lines. And I said, I have to keep 1 for the restaurant. So I had 1 for the restaurant. I gave the rest to the bank. And so I had no idea what I was doing, as you can tell by that story. I went over not understanding the environment, et cetera, but it came out that was fine. A little bit of bold moves, and that was a little bit of luck, and it went well.
So in the bottom, then you weren't planning to open a restaurant, right, at the beginning, or
no,
or you were going to rent it out, I suppose.
Yeah, I went to rent it out, and had never worked in a restaurant, no experience, and very lucky to have some very senior contacts at PepsiCo, and they basically said, no, we don't want to rent a place in Wroclaw, Poland, but if you're so confident, you can have the franchise. So we ended up with the franchise for Pizza Hut, and went about opening a restaurant. And again, lots of funny stories because we had no idea what we were doing. But on November 9th, 1993, we opened up our first restaurant.
Maybe you could just talk a little bit about, I think there was a tax issue or a permitting issue, if I recall. And you also, I think, slept in the restaurant, maybe the first few nights before it opened. Maybe you could just give us a little bit of color about that first restaurant.
Well, let's try and put things into perspective, because you go to Central Europe today and it's kind of hard to appreciate how different life was. The phone story gives you a little bit of it. But this was a city of about 700,000 people. And maybe there were 5 restaurants, when the wall came down. So you had no infrastructure. The same with the phone lines you had to do with electricity and everything else. And we're so excited to get open. And we've got a little bit of education on how to use Excel basically back then, and this is pre-mobile phones as another important element of this. So just getting things organized. We had to walk over to the post office to send a fax still. And it makes it sound like it's in some long lost era, and in a way it is. But we've gotten we've invested about $2 million to get the building up so that the bank could move in and build the restaurant. We still had 4 floors to build. But again, back to the strictness of communism, the VAT rules had been put in, and they were very, very strict on exactly what needed to be on a VAT invoice. There were 14 points, and if you were missing any of them, they would throw it out. Unbeknownst to us, when you would file, and I think this is true in a lot of places, so maybe it's pertinent to stupid young guys trying to open up in new markets still. But we went to claim our VAT input because it was an investment. We were overpaying a lot of VAT on all the investment stuff, so we would do a return. And so we filed, but at the same time, we decided we would put our books in an order that made sense to us, not necessarily in keeping with the strict requirements of the Polish government. And so we had all of these binders laid out because we had an empty floor. So we just had this huge room with all of our invoices and binders laid out. And we were trying to put things in a sensible order. And we filed and we asked for a $200,000 refund. And so immediately the tax office showed up to audit us and inspect it. And they find all these papers everywhere. And we weren't keeping it in the format that was required. So the maximum fine they could give us was 5 times the requested amount, which was $1 million, which, well, we had been open for 6 days. And I didn't have the money, of course, nowhere close. And so 6 days open, they padlocked our building. And that's pretty tough when you're a retail cool Western brand that's opening up, and all of a sudden there's a big sticker on your front window that you haven't paid your taxes. So that was about as brutal as thing. And I just, I called up the ambassador after trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And I said, look, I mean, I don't know if there's anything anybody can do, but I'm just going to go home, right? I mean, they can have the restaurant. I don't know what they'll do with it, but I don't have $1 million to give them, and I just can't do it. So after some very awkward days, they finally came back and said, okay, well, we're going to act like you never filed. And so you're not going to get your 200,000 back. And obviously I was counting on that for working capital, just having opened a restaurant. So yeah, my first opening was zero working capital. So we needed to get profitable quickly. That was the good news. So that's what happened. I mean, we really did. We got profitable very quickly, and one restaurant led to two, and two led to three, and then 4 was a mistake, and 5 was a mistake, and luckily 6 worked out. And we started growing, and we were quite profitable. And the business just grew like any good entrepreneurial story, 1, 2, 3, and then 5, and then 10. And it took us a while to get up to about 20 restaurants. And then PepsiCo bought the largest chocolate manufacturer in Poland, a company called Vettel. They invested $300 million back then, and they decided, okay, we want to have Poland as an all equity market, so we're not going to give you any more expansion. And that led to some interesting discussions. And then they said, okay, well, if you want to buy the Czech Republic business, it's a very small money losing business. There were 6 restaurants there that had lost $8 million. And so we overpaid for some money losing restaurants, and it taught us a ton. I mean, we had to learn how to work in new markets. It made us international. I mean, there was only 120 miles apart, but it was still, it was a new market with new rules and a new brand. So we ended up in the KFC business with that acquisition, and turned it around really quickly. A lot of what we had learned in Poland worked. We, focused a lot on building the brand and building local supply and making people feel like it was an accessible, aspirational experience for them. And we really became one of the first accessible, aspirational retail, local, foreign brands that could work. And so we were local, but we were foreign, so we had the big brand names. And we turned that around, and PepsiCo ended up having a lot of trouble in Poland on their own. So a few years later, we had a substantial opportunity to triple the business, because they were about double of our size then. And in 2000, we merged the businesses together in a deal, because I didn't have cash to buy them. But we had a buyout plan for the next 5 years. So in 2005, we were able to buy them fully out of the business. And by then, the businesses had gone. So when we bought them, we were 28 restaurants. They were 54. Then we about tripled the business in the next 5 years. So we were about 250 restaurants, and looked at taking the company public to raise some cash to get them out. And I thought my time was over, and that became one of the hallmarks of my 26-year stay. I thought I was leaving every 2 years. Every 2 years I was, okay, this experience is over, time to move on. But somehow, an opportunity or the business just kept being really interesting, or I got married, or I had another child, or something seemed to keep me in place. And we just kept growing the business year after year.
No, that's great. And then I guess when you left, it was 2,400 restaurants or so. Is that about right?
That's right.
Yeah.
We were 2,300 restaurants. Became actually the largest restaurant company in Europe, and I'm not sure how, and I'm not sure anybody ever stood how a second-tier city in Poland ended up producing the largest restaurant company in Europe. But a lot of Western Europeans were very surprised. I can assure you.
Built by an American, no less. Yeah, it's amazing.
Exactly.
So what was, in terms of the restaurant business, what is the secret sauce? I mean, it's obviously they're not all a success, every single location or brand, but what was it's a notoriously difficult business, obviously. And so what was your secret, would you say, if you had to boil it down?
Yeah, it's hard to always look back and find it. Certainly the culture of our company became quite unique. We were unique just out of some of the things we've already talked about, right? A foreigner in a new country with something that's never been done before. So we attracted, young people who thought things could get done that other people didn't think could get done. And that led to this motto that we had of Wszystko jest możliwe, which translates basically into anything is possible. And we just ran into so many roadblocks, like you've heard. And I just had to learn those three words. Everybody would tell me, no, niemożliwe, not possible. You can't do this. It's not the rules, etc. I said, I got so overwhelmed, being a young entrepreneur, the idea of coming into a ex-communist, very controlled environment and being told everything has a rule and everything can't be done and this has never been done before, etc. So we kind of just learned how to make things happen, and we never accepted that we were dead in the water. We were dead a few times, I can assure you. It's funny, as we became bigger, we had debt to asset ratios, debt to EBITDA ratios. We had all these controls. I just remember saying, I'll take money from anywhere I can get it at one point. I think debt was like 8.5 times EBITDA at one point, not because I was smart and trying to lever up, just because that was all we had. It was this attitude of, let's find, there is a right answer. I always explain, people will come and they'll explain to you why something went wrong. I was like, there's an equally valid answer of why it could have gone right. And everybody's always got a reason. And I just tried to keep saying, so what's your reason why it should have worked? Or what have you learned that would have made it work now? Because us sitting here and you just explaining your excuses of why it went this way or that way. So we kind of sort of built in this go, go, go culture, but very rapid learning. The other thing is none of us had restaurant experience. And I'll never know if that really was a good thing or not a good thing, but we kind of basically understood the customer was always right, sort of like some really basic tenets that made our service good. We had people that wanted to learn, could learn, and had never been, restaurant wait staff. They had never run a kitchen. So they didn't even know. I remember training things like, you have to take a tip. Like, you have to understand, if somebody gives you $100 bill for a 90 check, nobody's going to tip $10 or 10% of that. You have to go with change. I mean, you can't just go give them a 10 because you're not going to get it, right? It sounds so stupid, but really, really basic stuff. And we became a training culture, and we just train. And then that became our differentiator. And then, of course, we created some systems, and we started growing faster than anybody else. And so that sort of reinforced our position. We were the best buyer. We became the best buyer and the best trainer of the people. And then more people wanted us to buy them, and we had more people applying. It's amazing. We had 50,000 people when I left. And I can only remember sort of once or twice where we didn't have enough people. So as we were growing that quickly, adding 7,000-8,000 people a year, plus the turnover, which is difficult in our industry. But we always had enough people, and it was always the biggest fear of part of the more conservative part of the management team always said, oh no, we're not going to have enough people next year. We can't build 200 restaurants. We can't build 250 restaurants. There's too many people. We won't get them through the system. But somehow the culture kept great people coming through the system, and that enabled us to do it.
Let's, if you can, dive in a little bit on the culture topic, because I find it fascinating, particularly that you came up with a title of it. Some companies sort of have it, but don't really express it, I think, as well as you did. I guess you mentioned how it was one of the main differentiators and led you to success. But can you talk about where that came from? I mean, was it just inherent in you, and then sort of maybe the impact it had personally as well on just how you live life? And obviously you mentioned the business, but how easy is that to teach people? Do you just do it, or how does that work?
There was a lot of doubt. It's a great question, and I wish I could nail it down to what were the key moments. I mean, you can always look back and think of some moments that made you realize, okay, our culture is serious, and we're not going to trade it out. We're not going to make sacrifices against it. That's going to be paramount above all. But it happened very early in the company. we had some real question marks in terms of, did we have the right management team? Was I, with my real estate background, capable of leading a restaurant operation? A couple of the very senior staff came to me in October of 95, so just 2 years into the company, and said, Henry, you're just not the right guy to lead through this environment, and we're going to leave. And so I said, wait a minute, let's regroup here. I'm not sure that's the fact. Give me 6 months, trust me for 6 months. And we did our first sort of management offsite, which everybody does today. But that led to some real thinking. And then I read a few books, and the next year, in 96, I decided, okay, I really need to nail down, what are we trying to do? What are our values? What are our goals? How's this going to get structured? And so at a seemingly great expense then, I took 8 of us to Sweden for a weekend, which coming out of Poland was quite expensive for us. But we had an amazing time. And we wrote down our core values. We wrote down a 3-year plan of what we wanted to do with the company. And we came back and we just pushed those values heavily. We built a lot of systems around our training, and they stuck. I mean, amazingly, over the next 20 years, we really didn't change them. We added a couple of changes to the words around customer to make sure it was clear where the relationship sat between the team and the customer base. And there was a bit of, we had this training commitment to people, the development of people, but it sounded like all the responsibility sat on the company and not enough sat with the individual. So we changed the wording of that one to make it clear that the individual owned their own development, but the company would support it. And it worked. And then as we bought different countries or went into different countries, or we always wondered, well, how the hell is this going to work? How are our values going to translate? And I can assure you, taking a Polish company into Germany, the Germans don't exactly look to the Poles as like the best operators or the strongest, culture that they want to identify with. So, we had a ton of worries about that. But somehow this mix between let's have a lot of fun, expect a lot of our people, and we'll spend a lot to develop you, that blend of trust yet demanding environment really worked.
And you live it personally too. Outside the business, the same culture, I would say.
I don't think there's much choice. It's kind of like this whole conversation between work-life balance. I haven't figured out that there's more than one life, that we're living in some parallel world. To me, it's you get one life and you live it the best you can. And there are plenty of different disagreements around that within our executive team of what was expected. I said, look, if you're not enjoying yourself at any time, it's just the wrong place. We're living very interesting lives. I mean, I look back on my life and think, God, how lucky I was that I got on that plane. I might have built even a more interesting business in Washington, D.C., but it never would have given me the different viewpoints I had and the life experiences I've had. So, working through all that we did, of course, there was at times too much work or a ton of work, et cetera, but it blended into a life that's been super interesting. So I think they have to be aligned. You drive yourself crazy if you're misaligned. And in the company, the same thing. If, culture is different than strategy or is different than the way the executives are acting, it just doesn't work. You have to have alignment between strategy, structure, and culture. And any of those things get out of whack, then people don't know what to believe or trust. And I think the same is true of the CEO. So hopefully, they've all matched together in some format that people could believe and trust in.
At multiple points, I think you made an enormous bet. I think in particular, you agreed to buy La Tagliatelle for something like 200 million euros, $200 million. I think it was done overnight. Maybe you could just talk about, most people would just think that's downright scary, right? I mean, agreeing to a deal overnight and staying up and all this kind of thing. How do you do that time and again?
Yeah, people either scary or stupid. I'm not sure which is the better answer there. It was, it was the crisis times. It was after the economic fallout of 2008, and Spain got hit worse than any other country. And I had a friend who's still a very close friend, Steve Winiger, who had built up this business called La Tagliatella, and it was the number 2 Italian casual dining player in Spain. But it had the best margins I had seen. It was a great business. And he had told me about it a year before, but we didn't have any money. We didn't have enough to pull it off. And I was in the States, and I got a phone call from another friend saying, hey, I think Steve's deal with Lion Capital fell apart. Maybe you've got a window to get back in there. I called him up and I said, hey, can we take a look at it again? He said, well, it's actually not falling apart. It's just that they decided that they've spent all of their money out of Fund 4 and they're going to move this into Fund 5. So they've asked for an 18-day delay. And I said, well, that means you're bound or you're not bound. He said, we're not. I said, well, so can I come? And he said, sure, you can come, but I'm not sure anything's going to happen. So yeah, long story short, I fly over from, I was in the States at the time. I fly over, spend a day, and I'm like, we can do this. He says, well, you really only have 14 days. And then, so I said, well, I haven't been home. I haven't seen my wife in a week. Can I just go home? I'll go home for a day and then I'll come back. And I come back and he says, look, my private equity partners have told me I shouldn't have told you that. They don't want to walk away. It's too risky. This is the deal that's going to make their fund. The crisis has been so bad here. They're going to want to raise another fund. If this falls apart on them, they just, they need this win. So the head of the fund said, I can't do it. And I said, okay, well, I'll close in 48 hours. He said, what do you mean you'll close in 48 hours? So it was a 202 million euro deal. And we didn't have the money secured yet. That was going to need to be done as well. And it's too long a story probably for this interview discussion, whatever this is. And but it was the craziest next 24 hours because the CEO of Lion Capital found out I was in town, said, hey, I'm coming over. Do not break this deal up. And it all kind of crashed. I was told to get out of the building. And I told the head of the private equities office, we were in his lawyer's office. I said, you're going to have to call the police if you want me to leave. And I just laid down on the floor and I said, the good guys have to win this one. These guys screwed you. They were supposed to go to closing last week. They didn't show up to closing. They're now telling you 18 days. You promised me this business on Sunday. I'm not leaving until the good guys win. And they thought I was completely out of my mind, which I kind of was. And at that point, we were supposed to, I was promising Thursday. I think it was Tuesday. I said, okay, tomorrow at 2:00 we sign. They said, are you kidding me? It's impossible. We've got a shareholders agreement to do. We've got to do share purchases agreement. We got to do all this thing. And I said, you know what? Steve and I can shake hands on this. You're the problem. And you want earnouts and all the other things that private equity want. I said, if you'll just exit for some number, we can get a share purchase done by tomorrow at 2:00. And he looked at me, he was like, and then this is when I knew it was over. He said, typical PE, he said, okay, for 3 million more. And I said, yeah, for 3 million more. And so we stayed up all night, 34 of us from Big Four accounting firm, all of the lawyers, and a couple of people passed out at some point on the floor at different times. But the next day at 2:00, yeah, we signed. And then there was another whole funny part because I didn't have the money yet. We signed, and now we needed to figure out how we were going to get the banks comfortable that we could make a $20 million deposit or euro deposit into Spain at the time. But we got there. Another Cisco Yes Możliwe story that really changed the projection of the company for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. You mentioned earlier there were a few near death or almost death experiences. Did you ever during the 26 years think I've gone a little too far? Maybe it's over. For sure. What maybe you could talk about? For sure. Was there a certain instance that you can remember?
Well, I think the hardest was not a financial one. It was for me personally, but this is more of a story of where I thought I was over rather than the company. I mean, there were times in the company, most of our acquisitions, actually all of our acquisitions were successful, but we had one company where we got 33%. We were going for control, and I wanted to take control, but we'd only gotten to 33%. We had an option to get another 30% of the company. So we were clearly headed to control, and we got our board seats appointed to us, and we had our first board meeting sitting there as 30% owners. And it's the first time we were saying real inside numbers. And I just went, this company's bankrupt. And the books were cooked. This was a public company, but the books were cooked. And I was just staring that I had just totally screwed up, and our due diligence hadn't pulled it up. And all of a sudden, publicly, we were a public company buying another public company. We were threatened with lawsuits. It was a mess. And somehow somebody else didn't believe us when we said the company was bankrupt, and thought we were just trying to kill a competitor and gently get them out of our way. And so we got an offer to pay us 50 cents on the dollar for what we had just paid. And they said, if you think that this thing is bankrupt, well, this is a great gift. Put your money where your mouth is. And so I said, gladly, please. And the company actually was bankrupt, and it was a great based decision. So we got saved by getting 50% of our money back on it. But anyway, that's
a close call.
Live and learn. Close call.
Call. Maybe we could turn a little bit back to the team on the culture side. I was curious how you thought about incentivizing everyone, not only obviously Mark and the others, but throughout the organization.
Yes. From early days, I mean, very early days, I could go back to, restaurant 3, 4 even. We decided that every restaurant general manager, as we call them, should be treated as if it was their business. And we tried to build the management teams and structures where they felt ownership. So they had part of the marketing budget to spend. They had a lot of local store initiatives to be able to do. And then we put a bonus plan in that came out of cash flow. And it was their restaurant cash flow, not a lot of artificial overhead expenses or you got to pay for this or that. It was just, here's the restaurant P&L, here's the allocations. You're going to get 25% bonus based on EBITDA. So everybody in the company, in a place that wasn't very entrepreneurial or very business-minded, ended up learning a P&L very precisely. And that led longer and longer into just detail around know your P&L, know the business. And so as the business grew, we kept building incentive plans that were done that way. And so I guess we always had this mentality of entrepreneurship.
In 2012, I believe you changed your title from Chief Executive Officer to Chief Emotional Officer. And I was wondering what that meant and in practice and how did that change what you were doing?
Yes. So the business grew, and I said I was leaving every 2 years, and I really meant it. I really was. And in 2012, I realized that the business had gotten so big, my job had become more and more just motivating people, showing them what was possible. Wszystko jest możliwe. And I wasn't sitting in on performance reviews as much. I wasn't there in the day-to-day operations. I wasn't the one asking all the P&L questions. And I was barely honestly even looking at the P&L anymore. I mean, I was for my own, but I had great trust that somebody else had been through all the lines and I didn't need to sit there and tie out balance sheets and that stuff. And I just became more and more we can do this, let's make it happen. Where's the opportunity? How are we thinking strategically? And my job became sort of 25%. Do we have the right strategy for the next 3 years? Do we have the right direction for this thing? Do we have the right executive team? Because at this point, we had probably already changed the management team 2 times, I guess, in the history. And I realized at 100 million, it took a very different team. At 300 million again, and at $1 billion, it was going to take another change. And we were closing in on the opportunity to be $1 billion business. And so I met a friend of mine, Thomas is his name, in Dubai. He's a Swedish guy, and we were just talking about where he said, well, just think about different things. Like, what are you? You're talking about energy. You're talking about, I was like, yeah, emotions. That's what I drive it. I'll just be the chief emotional officer, and I'll leave the executive stuff to the people who are better at the executive stuff. So I came back and I did this totally weird psychedelic presentation to our top 300 people, very psychedelic, talking about purposeology and what our purpose was and what we could be. And people were looking at me half, ready to scream and get excited, and half, has this guy totally lost his mind now? And I said, from now on, I'm the chief emotional officer, and we're going to make sure our culture is just completely unique. And it did. You saw the room just literally split in half. Like, okay, he's definitely gone now. I mean, he's off the deep end. And the other half was like, yeah, this is so cool. This is exactly what we should be. And luckily, the latter ended up carrying the day. But I'm so happy I did it, Evan. I mean, you look back and you said, was it corny? Was it fake? Was it a PR stunt? No, it was an internal thing that really ended up driving expectations around what was a conversation with the guy running the company going to look like. Was it going to get lost in detail, or was a lot expected around, am I driving the culture? Do I have the right vision? What are we talking about as a company? And so for me, it was liberating, and I'm super happy I did it.
And did you change, though, what you were doing during the day? You gave up some executive kind of work?
I did.
Got it.
I did.
You talk about, I guess, somewhat relatedly, having 6 sleepless nights, a minimum of 6 sleepless nights per year. Maybe you could just talk about why you believe that.
I'm not religious on the 6. I think that different people can do different things. I mean, I've met people that have more because they physically can. But it's one of those questions that makes people stop and think, because if I say to people, hey, how many sleepless nights should you have? Most people I've met will say 0, because they've read it's not healthy. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, if you took your wife to Florence and spent the night out and then stayed up all night with her with, a candlelit room, how would you feel? Or more importantly, how would she feel? And they're like, yeah, I should probably do that once in a while. And then I'm like, I remember great stories of when I would travel a new place, and then you'd end up where I said, in college, you remember going out all night and being at a nightclub and just having a blast? I was in New York and in the studio 54 days. I remember that. It was just unbelievable, right? I said, so there's great fun there. And I said, my story of Spain that I told you before when we bought La Tagliatella, that was a night almost all of us will remember fondly. And so, you look at life and you say, well, what are the good reasons? Fear is actually a decent reason every once in a while to have a sleepless night, because it makes you get really focused on what the issues are, right? You just say, I can't sleep. Something's wrong here. What am I going to do? So even though fear sounds like a bad reason, every once in a while, I think it's a good reason. Opportunity is a great reason. I can't miss this moment, right? Like I've got to be in this moment right now. And it means you're taking enough risk. You're pushing it to the wall enough. You're making it happen. Romance is a great one. Fun is a great one. Just, every once, I think going to a place like New York City or Shanghai or places that really have an amazing nightlife and spending a night, we're only talking about 7 a.m. till 7 a.m. You can then fall asleep all you want, right? But make sure you get that full day, all of it. Just get all of it. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying just take it all one day. And really that may be once a quarter, maybe once a month, whatever suits you, but just do it.
On the scared side, you talked about how sort of the ability to push toward the wall or break through the wall. I was just curious sort of where that strength for you came from over your time. When did it come about, and particularly through personal difficulties? You touched on it a bit earlier, but I like that phrase of sort of, I think, going to the wall, as you say.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know. My father had a very tough time when I was 12 years old with, he had 7 children and he lost his business. So he was an entrepreneur, and it was hard to appreciate at the time. I remember hitting 50 and being, oh my gosh, this is exactly what happened to my dad. I don't know how I would have done with 7 children and losing my business and having to start over. But a few times I've thought about that, and how do you have the courage to do it? I think that probably I'm luckily consistent in my life. I don't think my life has changed a whole lot as I built the business and grew. And so I probably wasn't as afraid as some people are about taking a step backwards. You see in a lot of people, losing things is much harder than gaining things. People are much more afraid of losing $1,000 than a difference it would make if they gained 1,000. If you gave somebody 1,000, it wouldn't. But if they were to lose 1,000, it changes their behavior. It's a funny dichotomy of, they should be valued the same, but somehow losing really. And I think so. I don't have that sense as much. It would be a bummer, but I can get back up on my feet. I also, to a fault, get super excited into the game. Once the game gets started, it's really hard to pull me out of the game. And so once it's going, I'm just going to go until, we get to a result that we're aiming for. So I probably lose a bit of perspective, if I'm being fair. More times than not, it's worked out in my favor. So I've turned it into a positive trait, but there's definitely some negative aspects to it as well, if I'm being honest about it.
No, that's awesome. Maybe we could pivot a bit just into the restaurant industry, your expertise. I was curious, obviously now with the Corona situation and the crisis, so sort of how you see the future. We can dive into the aggregators and dark kitchens and all kinds of things, or wherever you want to take it. But I was just curious from your standpoint how you see this all working out over the coming years.
Right. It's, first of all, super difficult. It's brutal, and my hat goes off to all the people working that have tried to keep life normal for a lot of the rest of us, putting their risk on the table every day. And a lot of entrepreneurs who started businesses that have been wiped out. It's kind of hard to remember because the stock market's back up for a lot of businesses, but there are a lot of consumer-facing retail, whether it's airlines or restaurants or hotels, that are nowhere near back, and it's brutal, and it affects a huge part of the population. The restaurant industry is one of the largest employers in pretty much every country, and it's been really, really hit. So first of all, I think that's important to think about. In terms of what it does, there's been a shift in Europe, and I'm more of an expert on Europe than I am the U.S. The U.S. has been pretty consolidated under big brands for a while. It's more than half the restaurant space in the United States is branded chained concepts, whereas in Europe that number is not even a third of that. And you've got a market that's going to continue to consolidate. So this is going to drive that for sure. Mom and pops are going to go out of business. They're not going to be able to handle it. Chains in the short term are going to shrink because they're not going to be able to afford the real estate. They're going to take opportunities to cut, especially in cities like London and that have been completely disrupted as the financial sector has not had people coming back to work, etc. Obviously, like so many places, it's hyper-speeded the shift to delivery, which means digital because it's digital connection with the driver, it's digital connection with the ordering. Hopefully it will end up balancing out where the restaurant gets some more control back, whether that's people moving to voice, because right now everything is through an iPad or through a phone, or and it's all clicked in off an app, and the app controls a lot of it. I think that will shift. I think the restaurant space itself will figure out how to get a relationship direct back to the customer. I think that you'll see it's been very slow. If you talk to your friends or you look at certainly the white collar space, people overestimate how much conversation there's been around health and wellness and healthy residents. The truth is, it's been growing super slowly, 2% to 3% of overall meals. So that's going to pick up for sure.
And you mean better for you foods like Impossible
yes.
Burger Wings?
Yeah, we won't get into advertisements for one name or another, and I'm not sure I would agree with you on that health choice, but I do think that the honest greens sort of environments of is getting more attention, and people are thinking about what they're eating a bit more. It's still a minority, but it's going to grow faster. The ease of omni-channel, getting it where I want it, when I want it, how I want it, has certainly been sped up. And this idea that you brought up of dark kitchens, and people are figuring out lots of different ways to do dark kitchens, basically how to create, more choice for the customer as they want it at less expensive costs. And that's going to continue. I mean, we're getting better and better food. If you look back at the United States over the last 50 years, sort of every year, food gets better in America, right? Same is true in England. Food is getting better. And now it's going to get better for you as well. And it's not getting any more expensive. The cost of eating out has not risen as a part of our wallet in decades, and it's not going to. We keep getting better and better food for cheaper and cheaper, and that's pretty incredible. And technology is helping that, and now it's helping it even more. So I'm quite bullish on how we'll eat and the cost of it and the convenience of it. I think it's all headed in a good direction.
But you mentioned that maybe actually some of the restaurants will get control back. So you mean maybe that the aggregators will start to lose a bit of power? You were, I think, one of the earlier executives to notice, obviously, the power that these aggregators were going to have and have now. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, we were the first restaurant company in the world to actually buy our own aggregator, which was fantastic. Then we bought into the leading aggregator in Spain called Glovo as it was building up, and took a position in that. It is very much the power of the app. I mean, we all know how it was when Uber came. You had Uber and Lyft, and they ended up controlling 100% of the market. And now, depending on what city you're in, you're starting to see different taxi services come up with apps, or people looking at electric cars if they have more of an environmental bent. And you're starting to see some at the edges competition there. And if you look at Uber's stock price, obviously it has not done as well as they expected going into the IPO, and then post-IPO it hasn't performed. And I think that's for a myriad of reasons, but it's because you're starting to see some choice and competition in that space, and it's not as endless growth as they expected. The aggregator space has been a lot about consolidation, a lot about getting, it's been very rapid growth, but we are going to use voice more, and you're not going to use necessarily the same app. You're just going to say to Siri or Alexa or Google, hey Siri, I want, and then a lot of times you're going to order what you normally order. And that relationship doesn't have to be through an aggregator. That can be, your restaurant chain directly with a contract with Apple, having that access on the voice side. So I think that's one. I think that restaurants obviously were not as sophisticated as the aggregators in understanding the power and the value of their data and having that direct. So now they do. They're starting to build their own apps. They're starting to build in the direct customer relationship through loyalty and other pieces that are going to allow them to have that direct relationship and market directly to you. And then you're starting to see a lot more third-party delivery companies that don't necessarily control the order process. It's much cheaper for the restaurant to outsource just the delivery without outsourcing the customer relationship. So the stronger brands, the brands that have more of a direct relationship with the customer, will be easier for them, obviously. It's harder if you're one off mom and pop. I mean, how can you spend the money on getting the direct relationship? But for those that do and have a trusted brand, I think you'll see more and more trying to build and claw that back from the aggregators.
And then on the dark kitchens, I think you've mentioned previously that there's obviously certain kinds of food that are better for delivery and for dark kitchens. And so I know that I think the founder of Uber, if I'm not wrong, is spending a terrific amount of money on buying dark kitchen properties and so on. Do you think that's a good idea? It sounds like you're bullish on dark kitchens, but maybe it's not. It doesn't apply to every kind of food group, obviously.
It doesn't apply to every kind of food group, and it doesn't apply to every kind of brand. But from a Western point of view, which is what this conversation is so far, you really have to just look, I think, to Asia. Asia has had delivery-only services in their very populated cities, urban spaces. They've already realized the cost of real estate is ridiculous. You don't get to see restaurant spaces. So, go to China, and a lot of restaurants are on 5th floor, 6th floor, etc. Retail prime spaces were very expensive. A lot of the delivery restaurants were tucked around the corner, et cetera, very small kiosk style stuff. So it's a much, much bigger part of the restaurant scene in Asia we call them dark kitchens. For them, they were just sort of operating kitchens in the area. So I think the West will realize that managing the P&L and the cost of it is just a lot cheaper. And now delivery is becoming more and more of a prevalent aspect of what the customer wants. So the real cost ends up, I think, on the grocery side. Everybody thought this was going to kill restaurants. I'm not sure, because a lot of times we use restaurants for the enjoyment, the experience, getting together with friends, sharing, et cetera. It doesn't replace that. It replaces maybe a little bit the Domino's experience, because they've got more competition. But I don't think it. So it's more, I don't want to cook. I don't know if you read that UBS report from 2 or 3 years ago that said the kitchen is dead. That's probably right. The kitchen is dead. It doesn't mean restaurants are dead. And as long as restaurants give a great environment and excitement and build a brand, there's room for that. But dark kitchens will take more and more of different occasions.
You've also talked about, obviously, they're going to need to reconfigure the restaurants because you have delivery drivers and so on going in the front, and right. The whole model is going to have to be changed, I suppose.
For sure.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about Vapiano. You exited AmRest, I guess, in 2019, and it didn't take you long to get back into the restaurant business. You just couldn't stay away, I suppose. I don't know what you're comfortable talking about with Vapiano, but it's an interesting brand, widely recognized, I think, around the world. And I was just curious what the case was on Vapiano and turning it around.
Well, I don't think you've met my friend Mario Bauer, but Mario Bauer was the CEO for the international part of Vapiano until 3 years ago when he left. And he is bigger than life. He just has a super big, warm heart. To give you an idea, he lives on a boat in Amsterdam, and everybody calls him the teddy bear. So he's installing this double life-size teddy bear on the front entrance to his boat. So it's that kind of warm spirit. And he and I were looking at this prior to COVID and thinking it was an opportunity because the shareholders had sort of lost their way. They weren't agreeing. You lost the culture piece. It was a classic example where the culture and the structure were separating and the company was just being torn apart because of it. So the shareholders had one idea and the old culture had a different idea, and it got broken apart. So Mario said it's a great opportunity to get back into, and I followed him, and COVID, just offered a great opportunity to step back in. And it's fun looking at these points again of just how do you rebuild a team? How do you build the excitement? It's in 26 countries, so that's a challenge. It's a business that had 3 years of serious decline, so you need to halt that and get some belief back. But it's certainly hard in a time where a lot of the countries are going through lockdown number 2 now, and the industry is in such turmoil. But we're pretty bullish. I mean, I think we're happy in 90% of the places. we're doing better than we would have expected when we open up. We've got some challenges because bringing businesses out of a trouble in the most troubled time in the industry ever is some hard work. But I would say it's made me more bullish. We'll look at what other opportunities there are for growth. If there were 5 or 6 reasons for me to get back in the restaurant space before COVID, there's at least 100 now, right? So it's going to be an interesting next couple of years, that's for sure.
So are you going to become the chief emotional officer of Vapiano, or you're just going to stay on the sidelines?
Not yet. That's Mario's job, and he's doing a great job with it. So right now, I don't need to do that yet.
Got it. Understood. No, that sounds great. And what I guess it's a unique brand in terms of how it operates with the card. And so what could you just talk about what attracted you to that I guess style or business strategy that they have?
Well, it's a fast casual, affordable brand, right? I don't think the cards work long term. The world has moved on since those cards were introduced. We all carry a card in our phone basically all day long. So why have that? So it needs a new customer journey. It needs a new digital wake up. It's something they should have evolved. They didn't. We will evolve it. So I love the fast casual space. Italian is always the most popular everywhere in the world. You usually have your national cuisine, then Italian, and then something else. So it's in a great space. It's an affordable brand, positioned a bit above where you would think, based on the check. So I love the value orientation between quality to price. So great space, great price, and a lot of different opportunities to evolve it. And then I like things that have so many different optionalities. You've got a lot of different countries where it's established, doing well. It's got growth opportunities in, more than a dozen countries right now. So we get to really think about where is it that it makes most sense to put our capital and grow and develop this. So we're excited by the different optionality and the quality of the brand in people's minds versus how far it had been taken so quickly down.
Interesting. Maybe aside from Vapiano and AmRest, I was curious if there was one restaurant related or delivery aggregator, whatever you want to say in the food business that you just think you'd love to own.
Then you'll know what I'm going to go after next. No, I think that, is there anybody that I would love to own? It's a good question. I love it's out of the restaurant space. So it's in the food space, but it's out of the restaurant space.
That's fine.
I think what we're doing, where the world is headed in terms of lab grown meats, and that always sounds so bad to people at the beginning, but I think the environmental aspects, not to go vegetarian, but to use science to our benefit, and the Memphis Meats of the world, the companies that are using science, using the best quality meats, and taking that cell culture, multiplying that cell culture so we have a more sustainable way of eating great meat. That's got me the most excited. I think we're going to be eating phenomenal steaks without any of the destruction to the environment that we're talking about. So I would love to own the leading player in that space.
Fascinating. And it won't be like, it won't be synthetic foods. It'll be the real thing, you're saying.
That's right. I think you're going to take the best Kobe steak. You're going to find that perfect cow. You're going to take out exactly what you want. And we're going to figure out how to replicate it with all that beautiful marbling and the perfect protein. And we're going to get it. And you're going to cut into that juicy steak. And you're going to be, yes, this is what I wanted, without, 5 acres of destroyed waterlands and the rest of it that we have from the cattle industry or any other. I don't want to pick on any one industry. It's not sustainable to feed this much protein to this many people with the environment today, but we still should be having, and I'm not even bringing up the whole issue of animal treatment and the rest of it. There's just such a better way to do this sustainably and not have to eat, a beetroot. That's not a burger. I mean, come on. It's just, that's not a burger, right? I mean, so
not even close.
They're right. I mean, they're good. They're fine. They do what they want, and you can be vegetarian, it's great. But wouldn't it be nice not to choose vegetarian because that's what's better for the environment? It'd be nice to choose, you want to eat vegetarian because you think that's better for your health, fine. But let's not have the environment dictate what we're eating. Let's just solve that.
Yeah, you're making me hungry with the Kobe marbled steak. It sounds
it's going to be good, man.
Just to, on the sort of closing part here, just to pivot back, I guess one of my questions was, if you were 23 again and at Georgetown, thinking you're going to become a doctor and you wanted to go on one of these adventures, where would you go? What would you do?
God, the world has changed so much. It was so easy back then because you just asked everybody, what's the most interesting thing happening in the world? And literally like 8 out of 10 people would say the fall of the wall. If you went 10 years later, it was probably the rise of China. It was so easy in early 2000s say, okay, you should go to China. Today, the world, there's so many things that are changing quickly in different segments. I love what's happening in the tech space we just talked about, and that's not just food, that's so many places. So go to Silicon Valley or just find what interests you. What's happening in the biomedical world is fascinating. It's hard to read the global aspects. We've been calling Africa, the continent of the next decade, but we've been saying that for 4 decades or 5 decades. So which decade is it going to become true? It feels kind of hard right now with COVID, feels quite disrupted. China is very mature, but it's wonderful. And so I'm not sure exactly if I would choose geographically at the moment, or I would choose more what sector of the world interests you the most and go with it. There's going to be a ton on environmental issues. There's going to be a ton in different areas. So choose one of these fast moving areas that interests you and go spend time in it.
Yeah, so more sector focus, as you say, rather than geography, as the globe has sort of become one.
Correct.
I noticed that sadly Don Kindle Sr., I think he was 99, passed away a month or so ago.
Correct.
And I was curious what he meant to you. I know you touched on it earlier, your PepsiCo context, and for way of background, I think he was the CEO of PepsiCo and did a fantastic job building that. Maybe you could just talk a bit briefly about him and what he taught you and what he meant to you.
Evan, he meant everything. He was phenomenal. He was a person who walked into the room and you didn't even know how, but everybody in the room felt better. He had this sparkle in his eye, he had this positive energy. I described to his son, his name is also Don, a couple of days after the sad news, I was talking to him. I said, what hit me overnight? He was like this magic king. He would walk in and he would touch you and you felt more was possible and life was better. That's what Don was. He touched you and you thought you could do more and life was better than it was before he walked in the room. He was just this bright light with a positive view. He went into all the troubles of China and Russia. And this is way before I was there. This is like, 70, 69 in the heart of the Cold War. And he helped build up the Institute for East-West Studies. He was at the kitchen debate. He believed these countries could succeed if we gave them a good relationship and opportunities. He was just a very positive, the glass is half full. We can do a lot more in the world than we think we can. And phenomenal man, phenomenal.
Yeah, it's. I was reading over his all the things that he'd done. It just was amazing, and make it 99 years. I guess maybe just to wrap up, that was beautiful. Maybe you could just talk about sort of your proudest moment. I mean, at AmRest, you mentioned all these stories and the brands and all the experiences, but I was just wondering if there's one specific thing about AmRest looking back now that you're proud of in particular.
Well, I have to tell you, on our 25th anniversary, we took 700 people to Barcelona to celebrate, and we were there for 3 or 4 days, and we would do this regularly. It's called our Leadership University of AmRest, and the team was incredibly generous to me, celebrating the 25 years and just thanking. So I couldn't have been more proud than after those 3 days and feeling how many lives we had built up and changed and brought positive energy to. So back to the Don Kendall conversation, I felt like I took a bit of what I had learned from him and was able to pass it on as well. So it was great.
Thanks, Henry. That was awesome. We really appreciate it. This is presented by Van Chap Capital LLC for informational purposes only. The future-looking statements and opinions expressed herein do not necessarily represent Van Chap's views and opinions and may over time be proven inaccurate. Van Chap may or may not manage securities positions of the issuers discussed in this presentation. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell or a solicitation for an offer to buy any security. Van Chap does not guarantee the accuracy of the information provided herein, and this presentation should not be the basis of any investment decision.